Hello, my name is Tobe Hooper, and I directed Salem's Lot. This scene was shot in a church somewhere in Los Angeles. I forget the actual location. Most location photography was in small town, Ferndale, California, in Northern California. And after that was completed, we came back to Warner Brothers and finished on sound stages. Some producers asked me to come to Italy to talk to them about doing a Jim Jones film. And so I got to Rome and started talking, and my agent started calling, and apparently there'd been death threats put out on anyone who touches this subject. So I got back to Los Angeles really as fast as I could. I don't know, it was just something about it that was darker than dark that I didn't want to have anything to do with, really. Then I got this telephone call to have a meeting with Richard Kobritz, the executive producer. And it was really a terrific meeting because we had one thing in common that undeniably gave me strength of having a real producer protect my vision, and that was Alfred Hitchcock's language and cinematography. In other words, a Hitchcock technique would be going to someone walking toward the camera, and you see where their eyes shift to, and then you cut to his point of view. And so he protected that for me very well, even though it added shots. And that was fine for me because at this time I didn't know how to shoot television. I only knew the feature film world. So then the meeting went very well. I would go to a restaurant on Hollywood Boulevard called Musso and Frank's. And it's become a very famous booth that people wait for in the back of the restaurant by the phone booth, waiting to hear if they got the job. And the phone rang and I got the job. So here we are at the Marston house. That was intentional, not to try to duplicate the Psycho house, but one that had angles like that that were not very friendly. And so that was one of the first things on the location recce, was to find this location to build the house on. And the house has 4 sides and was 60 feet tall and had a perfect view of the rest of Salem's Lot, or Ferndale, with little church steeples and this very East Coast looking town. It had a problem. There was a house there on the exact spot that I needed the house. And so the production designer, Mark Rabinowitz, and I presume Richard Kobritz and other production staff from Warner Brothers talked the people in the house into letting us build our entire house around their house that they continued to live in while the film was being made. It's very strange because I knew they were in there, but personally, I never saw them go in or out. I shot it out pretty quickly. The house must have been like the 3rd day of production. I don't know, it took 3 or 4 days of shooting the house, day and night. I had to go back for a nighttime shoot. When I first moved to Los Angeles, after having completed my first film that did quite well, I had a chance of going with either Warner Brothers or Universal. And my friend William Friedkin was at Universal, but Salem's Lot had been acquired by Warner Brothers. It was a project offered to me, but also told that this probably will never happen. I think the length of it and just how to do it. And so I went to Universal for a while, and then it came up again during the holiday season. I got a phone call to come in and talk to Richard Kobritz about it, because now it had gone to television because it was difficult to adapt to a film, especially a film if it was a 2-hour film, even a 2.5-hour film, because it needed the scope and the experience of all of these other families and situations and relationships being pulled together by some dark force that enters their normal lives. So a 4-hour version of a motion picture may have been a very hard. A mini-series was really the only way to do what Salem's Lot intended to do. As I read Stephen King's book, it just would not have worked as a 2-hour movie. It really required getting to know a lot of people, a lot of families, their conflicts, and that just could not be done in 2 hours because it was truly massive. So I went to work straight away with Kobritz's blessing on Salem's Lot. By the way, this film is 3 hours long, and I will be getting to all of the actors. Mason, David Soul, Bonnie Bedelia. I had a great, very large cast, and so we're jumping around a lot, so I will try to cover all of these characters and actors. James Mason was one of the wonderful things in my life. He was really a beautiful man, very easy to work with, very inventive, could read your mind and fill in the gaps with where you're trying to go with him. And he already had this character established. And there's a scene later in the film where he's driving down to the antique shop, and it's a handheld camera on his profile and the old Cadillac he drives. And I'm hiding in the back seat, and turning into the driveway of the antiques store, he hits the curb and the camera jiggles and all. We did the shot again, but not after his suggestion of Tobe. You can always insert a baby's head and a wheel running over it and justify my mistake. It had a great sense of humor. Shooting material like this and realizing it, the weirder it gets, stranger the effective it is, it becomes very humorous to the people making it. And the humor is coming from, hey, I got that right. Hey, that's working. And that's a lot of fun. James was interested in trying out something like this and a miniseries. And God, he was just a great actor to work with. You know, he was so helpful down to the way he dressed. And a lot of director friends of mine come to me a lot and say, you know, I'm still jealous that you got to work with James Mason. And in Eureka, California, where we camped out, he had the bedroom above mine. And he would wake me up every morning on his exercise bike that would start slowly, and he would spin and spin and spin until finally I would get up because the room started to become alive. I mean, at least the ceiling did. Everyone got along in making this film, from Elisha Cook Jr. and Marie Windsor. The first time they'd been back together again since Stanley Kubrick's The Killing. They were great. We called him Cookie, Elijah Cook Jr., and every time he did something, it would be different. He would do it a different way, but it would always have the same meaning. Back to James Mason in this scene, he's menacing and a gentleman at the same time. So appropriate for this part. In this scene, it's early in the film, and it's a chance for David Soul to show the appropriate amount of emotion, the appropriate emotion and fear when he runs into James Mason. Because, I mean, that's really the whole key to good drama that is frightening, is the characters show the right amount of anxiety for the moment that their experiences, makes the audience more involved and interactive with what's going on. I kind of worked David up on this scene so he was truly tense. There is a thing I use, and that is I start getting tense, and I start getting the whole crew tense. I'm not in a good mood. Everyone knows it. It starts making everyone uncomfortable. I love that moment where Mason says good evening to him.
He always calls. You know that.
In casting, Elisha Cook and Marie Windsor. That was a thing that Richard Kobritz and I really wanted to do, was to team those two up again. They'd been in Stanley Kubrick's The Killing. We couldn't find Elisha Cook. It took a couple of weeks to locate him, and he was in Long Beach working at a bait shop. And of course, he wanted to get on board. Elisha just loved acting. I mean, he was acting when he was living. Our first encounter on the set, because he was in the first shot of the morning on the first day of principal photography. And he called me at 4 a.m. from his room, and he just had one line. And I told him, we'll take care of it in the morning. And then he called back and said, we'll take care of it right now. And then we talked it through. And then he called back, wanting to know if he could do it another way. And I finally, said, let me get to sleep. We have to go to work. And then I slammed the phone down. And then he saw me in the morning and started running for me. He said, I'm fired. I know I'm fired, right? Absolutely not. Let's just get on with this. And then he put so much into this, actually one line. And I found that kind of no matter what you did with Cookie, he would take that and incorporate it into something that would be even more pleasing. But every time I'd run into him, he'd say, I'm fired. I know I'm fired. So throughout the entire production, he was great. And Marie Windsor was just also incredible as Weasel's, Cookie's ex-wife, or estranged wife. And Marie runs the local boarding house and is also slowly drawn into the effect of this something very bad coming. Then there was Julie Cobb, a really fine actress, Bonnie Bedelia. The casting process was quite long because we saw almost every available actress of her age. Bonnie was cast after seeing a lot of actors that were up for this part. And she had a vulnerability to her and a kind of tenderness to her that seemed real. And I did need someone that you could care about as we moved toward the end of this film. I thought she was just terrific and a terrific actor.
Not one of those.
Very much for the dinner.
This particular scene, everyone was coming down with what they call the Humboldt flu. That's the county that Ferndale is in. And at this particular point, the sound man said, I can hear the fog hitting the microphone. And he had it covered. You work at night and you come down sick with something they call the Humboldt flu.
You like it?
I loved it. But then...
Ben Mears' Jeep. I just think this character is the only car I could have put him in. It also had a lot of pluses in that you were kind of vulnerable in a ragtop Jeep. And my intention was that as the film progresses and as things become darker, that something like that would work on you in a kind of subliminal way. Even if it didn't really come to mind, the spirit of it would. Not only that, he looked great in a Jeep.
I'm writing about a house.
David Soul, he was one of the most popular male stars on television that already gave him an introduction to do this part. If he was in something, people would tune in to see it. And I remembered that beyond his television work, he had been in a couple of features that I thought he was very good in. And he's a very good actor. And I had a meeting with him, with Richard Cobritz and someone else, an executive from Warner Brothers, and we agreed over that lunch in Century City, let's go with this guy. And the first day of shooting with him I had a new experience. I had to walk this very, very famous actor from his dressing room to his set, shoving people out of the way wanting his autograph. I mean, I had the ADs, we had to flank him to get through a crowd in a very small town. And he and I stayed friends for quite a long time. Or we're still friends, but we would hang out a lot years after this film was over. And he had these perks in life from his fame. That was the first shot in the film. Elijah Cook saying it's getting warmer. cast members got along with James Mason quite well. What I mean by that is they weren't intimidated by him, and it's an energy that he has that sets them at ease. Fred Willard is actually a comedian, and he was on a show called Fernwood Tonight, and just look, the perfect real estate man, and the perfect man for this. And he really enjoyed getting the part, and he became a lifelong friend.
I have a very valuable sideboard, a Hepplewhite that has to be picked. And your men will leave the keys for
The interior of the antique store, of course, is at Warner Brothers, and the set dressers were great. We had access to all of Warner Brothers' prop departments that go back to silent movies, so we could borrow all of those things for anything we wanted to fill the antique store with.
Barlow? Oh, I've told you, you should be meeting.
Revolt swept through the township of Jerusalem's lot. Soon
This is Lance Kerwin playing Mark Petrie, a major part in the film. This was a difficult scene to shoot because I had to imagine what a junior high school play would look like, and especially in its rehearsal stages. It gives us information about the territory around Salem's Lot and Jerusalem's Lot, and it was a nice background for the meeting of Ben Mears and Jason Burke, Lou Ayres, who had been his teacher when Ben Mears lived there in Salem's Lot as a child.
But they had fought for the greatest treasure of all.
Jeffrey Lewis had also been in a lot of features, and George Zenza had just recently come off of The Deer Hunter, had quite a nice part in The Deer Hunter.
It's pretty and it's quiet, you know.
Too quiet, especially at night.
I'm hardly ever here at night.
We built this graveyard. It's in Coldwater Canyon. There's a place that actually I shot 3 graveyards, and the studios have the gravestones to bring. It cuts into the real graveyard later. I'll try to explain when we get there with the scene at the graveyard in Ferndale.
Yeah, I got something else planned.
won't do that again.
Hey, come on.
I really liked filming in Ferndale. Traffic control was easy. They really let us use the town properly. It was non-threatening, and I think the people of Ferndale loved having us there.
Get in.
After. You stay away from her, you hear?
Salem's Lot is actually in Maine. That's a lot farther from Warner Brothers than Ferndale in Northern California. But it's the only place that looks like a small little village in Maine. And it's a strange anomaly in California that don't really know how it exists or what caused it to exist, but it was certainly perfect. And we shot about 2 weeks.
Anything, Woody Kid?
I love the story of Salem's Lot because it was the only vampire story that attracted me, because I could buy Frankenstein, but I never really cared for vampires until I read Salem's Lot. Kobritz and I wanted the vampire to be an absolute monster. That was a change. As far as I know, Stephen liked the film. I've stayed in touch with Stephen over the years. I've done other Stephen King movies. I know he liked Barlow becoming a monster. That was about the only thing that I had a significant part of changing.
Wants Bone Bone Bonnie to think he's gone to Portland.
Reggie Nalder looked like Nosferatu anyway. Reginalder was a real trip. The nails, the eyes, and the teeth, these things were glued on. He could move or sneeze and a nail would fall off. So there were times that James Mason and David Soul had to guide him through a few scenes by holding his arm or something so he wouldn't just start falling apart. Because he couldn't see very well through the squirrel lenses in his eyes. They cover the entire surface of the eyeball, not just like contacts.
Have a drink?
I don't mind. Canadian on the rocks.
Now we get the sense that the evil is arriving in Salem's Lot. I think it was very important to turn Reginalder, who plays Barlow, the vampire, into a monster that was very frightening to look at. And that Nosferatu look was actually a kind of happy accident, and that Reginalder himself looked a bit like the images of Nosferatu that I'd seen. Also a nice savings here that actually gave me the ability to shoot this scene a little faster was this set that is supposed to be down by the water and is actually just the sound stage wall that the police officer, the guard, is sitting next to, and you can see out and to Warner Brothers through the open door. Now some strange things are beginning to happen as the evil approaches its destination. The color blue and green are being introduced now into the film to kind of cue the effect of the vampire rotting, decay, usually a beautiful color, but in association with what will be happening and what you will see happen, should become uncomfortable for you later in the film. When you get inside the Marston house, I think that will become clear. And here's Julie Cobb. She's playing Boom Boom Bonnie, as some of the guys in Salem's Lot call her. And she's making demands on Fred Willard.
Honey, it's safe.
We're in Mark Petrie's bedroom now, who eventually in his life, for me, the subtext of the character is he's going to become a writer. This is his genre. In a way, it's Stephen King. Has those interests quite early in life in the same way that I had interest for the fantastic when I was growing up. Of course, his family is not that fond of what he's doing. Mother or the father, they tell him he'll never be able to make a living, and he's quite convinced that he will, as I think a lot of people are that know what they're doing, and I think this character knows that he knows what he's doing. All of the props you're seeing right now are from Warner's. Lou Ayres, one scene in this film, told me to get in his costume and do it my way. He didn't want to treat this subject like a reality. And we would have the most fantastic conversations about preternatural things. And I said, that's what I'm talking about. And he said, yeah, but that's real, and there are no vampires. But he finally came around. I mean, as we talked things through, or as he would get angry with me at times, I learned a lot from that guy. I really am happy that I worked with him. All Quiet on the Western Front was a great performance. He's giving a great performance here as well. I think this was just a choice. I think he believed things like this.
Evil. I've seen trees that look like tortured.
The reason Mark Petrie and Ben Mears come together is Ben Mears is a writer who had come from Salem's Lot. The things he's talking about right now go back to an experience he had when he was a young boy, about Mark Petrie's age, and his adventures through his sneaking into the Morrison house. He's one of the compressions lost from the book, his backstory as a child. But then there's only so many hours you can suspend an audience with, so we lost that. But there's a lot in common between Ben Mears and Mark Petrie.
Never proved. And now we have a Mr. Straker.
Weird. Let's try this again.
Danny, Ralphie, your mom called. Want you home.
Okay, Mr. Beecher.
I think the masks here were from the prop shop. They were generic items or items that could get clearances on. It wasn't like when I made the Fun House and was able to use a mask of the actual Frankenstein creature that Universal owned, a film I made for them.
Soon, I guess.
There is this interesting distance between Mark Petrie and his father. And also things now are, the noose is beginning to tighten. It's a strange intersection with destiny. These things happening over and over again at this particular plot of Earth in Salem's Lot. I believe in things like that, but I think a lot of people do. I know the natives of this country believed in things like bad places.
Look, you can even see the lights of Jordan Avenue.
You know that something is getting ready to happen bad, and there are some mechanics involved. A wind storm comes and goes away, and you, I think, automatically think that something is going to happen in the wind storm. And then when the smoke starts going away and the storm goes down and the tension level is dropping and you're relaxing, you get the button, the sting. So there are mechanics and sciences setting up scenes that make you uncomfortable and then even more uncomfortable. When an audience gets one or two of those things, the whole film to them starts becoming an interactive process. In cinema, we see a lot of, actually don't see a lot because they never get to the finished screen. But when a director creates a moment where it requires the audience to ask a question or to involve their emotion and is unanswered, it causes the audience to think. And if they're thinking, that means involvement, even if it isn't paid off then. I've noticed that of late in a lot of films. The audience doesn't need it, but there are people that think that they need the payoff immediate or the audience will be confused. Clarissa Kay is James Mason's wife, the actress, and very dear lady, and also a very good actress, and cast perfectly for the mother of the Glick boys. This particular part of the cemetery is in Franklin Canyon. That's this kind of hidden canyon off Coldwater, and has been used as a cemetery in a lot of films. James Mason referred to this scene as that he's bringing Barlow his little giftie. The dead could not have their eyes open. The undead could have their eyes open while they appear to be dead. He has some quite nice smiles and pleased with himself.
Out of the bed. Out of the bed. Out.
George Zunza is going to put this shotgun in Fred Willard's face. There was a feature version shot, and the film had been edited down to, I don't know, a 2-hour, maybe it's an hour and a half version that isn't nearly as much fun, where he puts the gun in his mouth. Someone paid to have it shot, a foreign distribution company gave additional money to the budget to put a few little things in it like that made it a little gorier. I absolutely feel better about the long version of Salem's Lot as opposed to the short version that really does not have the emotional impact. I didn't know while I was shooting the film, because I just didn't have time to think about the fate of that. I spent most of my time working on what my reality was, and that is this, and how tense I could make this within the restraints of what I could do.
In the living room, man-to-man stuff. This shotgun's got a 5-pound pull on it, and I've got about 3 on it now.
If that gun had been in his mouth like it was in Stephen King's book, it would have been slightly better, but not really. I mean, you know, the gun will take his head completely off this way if that's the way it works out. The reason for this and that technical science of causing yet again another shock to come, this is only a part of that. This winds you up, and in a moment you'll get slapped. That slap's coming. I'll blow it for you right there.
Come, puss.
Bonnie Bedelia and David Soul had really good chemistry. They were good friends, and they're both very loving people. They were a perfect match.
And I don't give enough answers.
Maybe we talk too much.
This was shot on the Warner Brothers back lot. It was just a little pond of water because it was set up one shot. You see them there, and you know they're going to the lake, And so when you see a little water in the background, that expands in your mind as much more than a puddle of water. There are two of these, and I think this is the most difficult one because I invented this rig. It seems like in the screenplay, this had been taken out, and it was truly the most effective thing for me. In Stephen King's book were these floating dead babies. And so I invented this rig to float the kid. And the reason I say I invented a rig, he isn't on wires. I wanted to be able to do a magic trick and put the floating device through the hoop. That is, of course, the window frame. And so he's actually goes through the window frame that proves that he isn't hanging there by wires. And another part of this is that a lot of this scene is shot backward. So it gives a slightly weird motion that you can sense it, but you can't really see it. And also I was able to pull the smoke into him. When they aired this originally, part one was darker than this, but part two, a week later, the network showed it so dark that you almost couldn't see it. They did make an event of it, so showing it a week apart may have been better for ratings. They could string it a week.
And get in the other car. Or truck. That's what I think.
That's what you
Ed Flanders was a really great natural actor that never got it wrong. Anything he did was great. Real pleasure working with him because anything he did was right.
For now, any history of rheumatic fever?
There was an effort to make it a 2-hour theatrical motion picture that I was going to direct. William Friedkin was going to produce it, and it became obvious that it just can't be done in 2 hours, and it kind of floated away. The source material is very good. The screenplay was 200 and something pages long, and King's book was around 600 pages. And as I would do my homework, I would go back and forth between the book and the screenplay to do my best to be as faithful to the emotions that I felt reading the King novel. There was momentum in what was available to you from King as you liked it and liked it more and more and more. And he has an understanding of this, more than the genre, but how the genre works. If it's frightening or if it's something else, he has an understanding of real life as an observer. He lives in Maine, and he didn't dive into a society where it was all about how can you make it work. He knew how to make it work because he was an observer, and he wasn't pulled into a place that you had to prove how it works, if that makes any sense. And it's also much less expensive to put your ideas down on paper than it is to put them on film. He had freedom.
My partner's full name is Kurt Barlow.
I was going to do the book, but I was told this will never be done. Since that's one of the early things offered to me, I thought, well, I'd better get about doing what I'm going to do. Right around the time I got this job and was waiting at Musso Frank's for the payphone to ring, I read the book. There were a lot of people coming on the set, but I don't think Monash came to the set. I don't recall that. A lot of reasons, I mean, it could be that I was having to shoot so fast, make my day, and I shot the film in 37 days.
R.S. Writer. Yeah, book's called...
It could be pernicious anemia.
Coming on.
This is a practical location in Los Angeles, the interior of this house.
Ready?
Yeah.
We're going to the movies in Bangor.
Yourself. But you could have been a little more discreet, right?
It was a good script. It's good dialogue. It's a good way of telling the story. I wanted to make it scary. Until then, I mean, the motion picture Dracula wasn't scary to me. But a lot of that is the vampire films. I had not seen one treated seriously. Like a motion picture with good characters, good acting, slickly done, that plays like a motion picture that has a vampire in it, where you have a chance of being afraid. There are situations were good. Also, especially with the sheriff, Kenneth McMillan, had a certain level of slickness to it, and you believed in the characters. And then these characters happened to have a problem. So I knew I would go a long way with my involvement and casting it well and directing the actors to where they could actually believe what they were seeing when they saw it and respond the same way you would respond if in your life something like this happened.
I fully intend to. Now,
If all my producers been like Richard Cobritz, I would have had a blessed life. He was completely supportive. I'm sure there were things going on in the background that would never even get to me. I would spend a lot of time working with the actors, and also the kids floating through the window. I was only given a certain amount of time to do it because the executives didn't believe I could do that and do it and stay on schedule. So they'd been watching all the dailies at lunchtime at CBS and here at Warner's, and were loving what they were seeing, but they still didn't think I could do the kind of special effects that I was designing, the practical magic trick kind of special effects. And the kids floating through the windows, so important to me that I did do it, and they loved it. And then after that, I would start working with the actors again. And I got a phone call. I was on the sound stage, and they suggested, why don't you not spend so much time working with the actors and get on with what's really important? And that's more things like floating those kids through the window. This cemetery was in Ferndale. It's quite extraordinary, up a hill and all. But to complete this sequence, so this is in Franklin Canyon. It's off Coldwater, this cemetery that was built here. In a moment, Mike Ryerson, played by Jeffrey Lewis, will be covering the grave, and part of it is shot from inside a soundstage, and the Ferndale Cemetery and the Franklin Canyon Cemetery will all be cut together, and there just wasn't enough time. It was just work fast without sacrificing quality. That shot's in Ferndale with the town in the back. And the grave is here in a soundstage. I had a technical challenge in this scene. That was my response to reading the book, was how fast can I get the little boy who's now a vampire to jettison up from a position where he's lying down into Mike Ryerson's face. Came up with shooting it backwards. It's easier. You can lie down, you can fall back, and that's faster than your muscles can push you up. And in part two, that's coming up pretty soon, there are other magic, I call them magic tricks. Jeffrey Lewis did a really great job here with this grave hypnotizing him, pulling him in. These interesting energies that are floating about Salem's Lot now. I think stepping back helped set up the possibility of him jumping into the grave or being called, pulled. That was the end of the first part of this two-part miniseries.
Ben.
They always had a cover set for Rain. Probably the board got shuffled around a couple of times if something. It was pretty much to the hour of shooting, and I don't recall this screenplay having a lot of pink and blue pages or yellow pages. If one doesn't know, that means rewrite, new pages that would indicate change. There may have been things dropped, but if so, I don't recall. These Revell models that King has in the book, we couldn't find them anywhere. The property department could not find them. And I remembered my production designer, Bob Burns, from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And he used to have all sorts of things like that. And I thought, you know, if anybody can find them, he can. And so I called him. And I said, you have any idea they'd stop making them, where you could find these specific ones? And he said, yeah, let me check it out. And he called me back and he said, yeah, I found them. And I said, oh, great, Bob. Can you go buy them and put them together and send them out here? Or I'll arrange someone. But anyway, they showed up in the mail, put together with a bill for $25. It was probably one of the best deals in motion picture history.
Like you were interested in numbers, so you became an accountant.
Traveled a lot? There's no
In Chainsaw, I think I had 30 shooting days. 37 days for this. I don't recall there being any real difference other than it was easier to shoot with a well-oiled crew and with professionals that had been working a lifetime. I don't know how it changed the style so much as I probably had less coverage shooting this because it was character dependent. I think visually my films take on a little different style. And everything I do, I seem to want to reinvent myself. That may be a good thing or a bad thing. Possibly adapting to the schedule had something to do with it. I thought there would be this big difference, but I found that I wasn't aware of the hugeness behind me, because if I'm looking at that, I can't see this. So I'm almost never aware of what's going on behind me while making a film until something hits me. And the transition of being dead and then coming to, kind of waking up. I mean, I treated it as though they were waking up into a new consciousness, a new life. So it was something easy for the actor to adapt that ideal. It seems logical that that's what it would be. I don't think they knew that they were necessarily a bad thing as it was happening to them until the hunger set in. Mark Petrie does have an inner strength that allows him to go through this scene without damage or transition. It's because he believes in things like this. This is a part of his makeup, his writing, his fascination with monsters. So he has a kind of knowledge that gives him a courage to resist. That's a vampire setting. And he knows that they can't come in unless they're invited. And he made that transition as he started to unlatch the window. I'm really proud of this sequence. Lance Curran had this television show that ran for I don't know how many years. James at 16. He had a lot of flying hours.
I'm sorry.
It was important for me to get the drama right. It was deliberate not to cut into a close-up of the dad and that over from Mark to the silhouette of the father. Cutting into the dad would have destroyed the vibrations and the tone of what you just... At this time, I believe it was the most expensive miniseries made. The Morriston house was built. The cast certainly supports the idea of epic, and that had some of my favorite actors. They were all good actors, and they were actors that were working inside the acting style of their time, and it was big. David was trying to show how good an actor he is. He was trying to break the idea of being Starsky and Hutch or being a piece of product rather than a very talented man. And he's very good in this, and he's a very good actor. Starsky and Hutch was good to him, but he needed to move on. I've become very good friends with David by this time in production, and he would totally surprise me when he's talking on the phone to Susan Norton. I could hold on him a long time, and he would hold up a long time rather than shooting bits and pieces. He had the chops to hang in there in a oneer and do quite a long scene.
Give me about 10 minutes.
This was a real location here in Los Angeles. Now, this is on the soundstage. The bedroom is a build.
He's all right, Jason. He's sleeping.
The window's open.
It was really beautiful watching things play out. I really love when it's working. You make adjustments and corrections, and to just watch it in real time with a much faster shutter, your eyeballs without a shutter in front of a lens, really did a lot for me and emotionally to me. I see a lot of films where performances are bad, and I actually wonder how that happens with good actors. Like, what do you have to do to a good actor to make him look bad? If a director obviously knows what he wants, but is also in collaboration with an actor, and you see the director running around and you feel safe with him. If you're doing your job, your actors will feel safe. I came out of everything from camera. I could have shot the movie if I had to. Makeup. I mean, it was making 8mm films when I was a very small child. I made my first talking movie when I was 16 years old. But all of that was a process of learning. I can't remember a time that I wasn't doing it and growing with it.
Bill?
When I was just starting, I made little theatrical 8mm films. And then I only had one legitimate job, and that was an usher in a movie theater, and I was incompetent at that job and was fired after 2 or 3 weeks. So I started getting into film through documentary filmmaking, companies that would hire me to be a cinematographer, and I proved that I could do that. I could do makeup, and I excelled at editing. I love editing. I've made a couple of films, one film in particular called Eggshells, about 1969, and college campus, hippie commune, a film for festivals. It did get a few play dates and won some awards, but it was kind of this fantasy, psychedelic kind of film. And it didn't succeed in doing what I wanted it to do, and that was to get another job making another feature-length film. I liked all films, and I noticed in a genre film you could make a low budget. You didn't need established stars. There were a lot of expenses that you didn't have to have. So I made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it was such a successful movie. The next thing I made is in the genre, and then you're stuck. I mean, not really if you want to wait 25 years between films, but if they know you can do it, this is what they offer. I understand it. This is still a pretty good place of business. Having my own business as a making genre, I may as well make the best out of it. Really investigate and experiment with this as a part of my reality now as a film director. can remember James and his wife Clarissa, and we were in the wardrobe warehouse here, and he was rummaging through the wardrobe looking for the kind of thing that his character, after having read the book and, of course, it agreed to do the screenplay. What would Straker wear? What kind of hat would he? He and I also developed a lifelong friendship for him. I mean, he was a wonderful guy. He thought I was a little eccentric, and he thought Kubrick was eccentric. Stanley had this reputation of being hard to work for because he would do so many takes, because what he was doing is just working the acting out of them. But Mason loved him from Lolita, whereas other actors would complain about that. We're on location here in LA in the scene, and then we go into the bedroom, and Mike Ryerson is already in the house. And there are these contact lenses that Jeffrey had. Jeffrey has extremely large eyeballs. So underneath the plastic, both front and back, of these lenses that he had on, had a highly reflective sparkles to them. So that was one of my problems. And the book kept talking about the eyes, and I always wondered, why do you look a vampire in the eye? Because they're just looking at you. What makes that kind of hypnotic? So I came up with that. They need something in the eye. A 100-watt light bulb hanging by the lens would bounce 90% of the shiny material inside the contact lens back. Now, of course, they would be CG'd. When Jason Burke comes in with the cross, watch Jeffrey Lewis, the way he stands up. He almost seems to levitate. And there is a trick that he showed me that I said, oh, we have to do that, because he's crouched in a position, so when he unfolds as he's standing up, he's doing something special that is elongating his body and making him look weightless. Really a terrific bit of business. Here's the introduction of Barlow for a jump scare. Usually this wouldn't work unless it's all in one shot and you set it up in a way so the bad thing enters the frame that the subject is in. See, now that's obviously a different frame. But because he's so damn not what you expect and scary that it works. You don't see him that many times either, so you don't become that saturated with that look. And the screenings, they screamed. Granted, in those days when this was made, people did still scream. Then came a time where they only jumped. Now that they've seen all of that and what's new, I mean, to get a jump is good. To get a scream, you can help them scream in 7.1 surround by adding some screams on the soundtrack that will then allow the audience the freedom to do it. I used Mart again in Funhouse to design the colorful carnival things because I wanted to take advantage of that very special designer. There's something I want to say about Mart when we go into the Marston house, because when we're in the Marston house, he built the front room, the foyer, and the design of Gone with the Wind, not Tara, but the house that was built by Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara. And the staircase goes straight up, and then it hallways expand out from that. There's something classical about that. and directing the actors like David Soul, you could see his belief, and it isn't just saying lines about it. There is an emotional thing that is coming from him that you get if you do it over and over and over again. And then once the actor gets there, then you don't have to do it again every time. There is one shot in the movie that I work him over the top and actually had to use an earlier take, but he was free to play.
Marjorie.
There's an effect in here where mother and father get their heads bashed together. That is very dangerous thing to do. It's in the book and it's in the screenplay. I like this reveal of Barlow. Part of Reggie Nalder being Barlow, being a monster, is in his body language, and that comes from this strange anger, almost like rabies. He's going to do bad, he has to do bad, even if he doesn't drink the blood. But there's this weird, strange anger that this creature has. He moves fast.
Could you do it?
I hate to call them a pose, but if I did, I mean, they're good enough to be put on a one sheet. These increments that you do before I cut away from it.
I'm going to kill you.
It's much more animalistic. Opening this sequence in this funeral home, before we go back behind the curtain where it gets really nasty, you want to set a tone for something that is really the scariest to most people, I dare say, at least back then. Death is something that in the Western world is scary. That's the reason I opened that shot in the display area of the coffin top. This is the Hitchcock time bomb under your chair theory, where you know what time the bomb is going to go off, and so someone continues to sit in the chair. The thing that makes this film work, an example, is what David Soul is doing now. He believes this. And what he's doing is in attune with this particular situation. And his emotions are playing off of this particular situation. And getting those things synchronized kind of turns it into its own music. This, of course, is just creepy. Clarissa understood this. There's something that happens here, this kind of energy that pulls these surgical tables into. There were other things that were supposed to fall, but time didn't allow doing it. It was either that or it was the timing of the tables were a little bit out of sync with the energy. This is another scene that sells this as a reality, and it's Ed Flanders. You'll have to watch Ed Flanders. He says, "I've seen it, but I don't believe it," something like that, and he sells his feelings.
How can he be killed? Any way at all. Gun, knife. Still, Ben.
This may have been shot before the other scene was shot. So what I do with my 200 and something page script and the way I would do my homework every day, or my homework before I would shoot a scene, is I have things color coded, that I knew the code or the symbol for the intensity and my recall to what has just happened to bring you to that spot. And instead of flipping through my script forward to get to there, I would go from the last page, and flip through the script backward to see all of these things that I have to touch on, I have to hit or smash on. Going backward, I would know where I was going to, so I could keep it straight so the intensity could grow rather than be uneven. I used to say, read the script backward, and I think that was confusing. What they were doing as actors was adapting to a particular new reality. Most of our interaction was about turning this into a reality. That we weren't just shooting a film, but that we were creating this little world. And this unknown thing falls from the sky into their world. And treating the ground floor, the foundation of the story, like Ben Mears comes home, he meets Susan Norton, they have an affair, he gets to know their parents, but something happens. They were real inside the foundation, and then would make adjustments accordingly to what fell into a story about a guy coming home to write a book about an experience he had when he lived there as a young man. The house is definitely a character. What I said was kind of a negative magnet that draws evil to it, that it was like a bad spot on Earth. Possibly a horror monolith was buried underneath that house. I mean, something still unknown that has an energy that loves horror. That loves the very idea of torment and hell. I don't know what that thing is, but I was playing it as though there was something underneath that house that just drew things to it. I think there are places like that.
Just like old times.
When Marie Windsor stands up, she does something that almost makes her levitate. It was always planned that the house would be built. You usually don't see a house. I mean, even that tree was put in. I don't remember how much pre-production time I had on this film. I know it would have had to go up here time after time. The house must have taken a month or so to build, making the deal with the people's house inside the house. It must have been 3 or 4 months. I don't know how successful, say, Nosferatu was with Klaus Kinski, and it was kind of an art house film. They got a lot of publicity, and they got some magazine covers. Dracula with Frank Langella, it wasn't really a scary film, not to me. It was a beautiful film to watch, and it was a good remake of Dracula. It was on Broadway. Maybe there is some connection to the other films, Nosferatu and Dracula being the foundation of this being successful. The interior of the Marston house is so dank with mold and fungus that one could say that the place is alive because every square inch of it has living bacteria sliming, and the house is dripping in its own kind of green pus like effluvia. And you'll see Ed Norton touching it and rubbing it off of his hand. It's almost like being in the entrails of something that is, it gives you the impression of it's decaying, but actually it's more alive than decaying. Mark Rabinowitz designed this interior, shot on a soundstage, and the pattern of the house from Gone with the Wind, the house that Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara built in Atlanta. Not Terror, but the house they lived in while they were together. The choice of the dead animals and things is that if something gets in that house, something will kill it, unless it's a rat, and then they'll use it.
Please.
Here comes a little thing or a distraction of theirs, which was, I call a bing bang bong, where they all look at three different places. One thing, one bang. So whatever it is, there's things all around them.
He's here.
I'm very fond of this scene. James Mason is really quite wonderful in this.
Susan.
He's the vampire's keeper, the satellite. He's flesh and blood and killable. I mean, I guess there's sycophants in every profession, but he's described as the watchdog. That has somewhere, somehow, back 40 years ago, probably, or like Renfield. He does have superhuman strength. This is like a 3 or 4 page scene, and the sun is actually going down. I got to this location at the end of the day, and decided there's no way to get through this unless I find a way to do all of this in one take and one camera setup. I do like coverage. Reality sometimes causes you to make a change that actually makes something better. There were Ferndale people on the outside behind us that lived in the neighborhood. I think I did that 3 times to get it, and they would applaud every time. Harry Zuckman, who scored this film, won the Academy Award for a film, Song Without End. Was mainly chosen because both Richard Kobritz and myself love Bernard Herrmann. Although this thankfully doesn't sound like Jason and the Argonauts. Love Bernard Herrmann anyway, through Psycho and through the Hitchcock films. Harry Zuckman was his arranger. He knew what I was talking about, but would only go that far with it because he had a vision too. But the opening credits, you do hear those notes that are closer to Bernard Herrmann than the rest of the score. But anyway, I loved his score. This was first or second day of shooting when Mark Petrie runs out the door and you can see his shoulder hits David Soul in the eye. That was it for the day. I was sure he was going to have such a shiner and we wouldn't be able to shoot the next day, but had some pretty magical people in the emergency department. I think I shot more sequences than we see here because I think it had to be shortened for the TV commercials. But watching it, it seems like there is something missing, not something that would ruin the film. There's some situation I feel I didn't see.
Ben!
Carol Sachs was an absolute great editor, a real cutting machine. He cut on this upright moviola and could go so fast that I could see cut together the next day of what I'd shot the day before. Carol toward shooting the end of the picture, came in to the cutting room one morning, and he was all bandaged, and he'd fallen through the glass door of his shower. And I didn't know he was ill. He shot and cut a lot of film for nuclear testing. With a 16-millimeter camera, he would run into areas close enough to the center of where a bomb had gone off that the sand was turning into glass on his shoes. We lost him not that long after shooting the film. Wonderful man. In the book and in the screenplay, Stryker picks him up and hangs him on some antlers and horns on the wall. Oh, well, actually, it's in there. That wasn't in there originally. Fortunately, I didn't have to deal with it. It would have been Richard. I did this over and over. I remember James must have, I don't know, it must have been shot it 4 or 5 times, so David would have, over his shoulder, look, David must have unloaded and all 15 or 20 blanks into him. It didn't bother James. He's a trooper. It would have bothered me, actually. I would have flinched of it. I'm sure it wasn't the first time he did it.
Clark, wait! Clark, wait!
The root cellar, this is part of the basement. You go through the storm doors to get into this. The root cellar is connected to this. This particular room had limited requirements. Put the money into the coffin. It really weighed a lot, like 500 pounds, that you will see in a minute. That was a designed coffin. You've seen it so many times. Anyway, you know what's going on. It's giving you a bonus. In the foreground, the vampire is being staked and staked good. Although in the background, something no one knows about except us, the audience, there is something really very bad going on. We had made a wax head of Barlow to try to disintegrate him. Had a hot air mover blow onto that to see his skin melt away, but it was experimental and it took so long to do. Speeding it up or nothing really worked, but that's fine. This was a difficult thing to do. Those are flame bars that are not touching the ground. And they wouldn't let me set a fire up there on the ground. This is B-roll footage that wasn't used in Elie Kazan's The Arrangement when he burns his father's house down. And I was only able to shoot one. It dollies into a window that matches the window in the root cellar, and you can hear screaming, and there's a little fire in that. But that entire area, that hill, was made of mulch. And I learned this thing that people couldn't smoke cigarettes up there or cigars because any kind of little flame could go down in that mulch and worm its way up to 2 years and pop up as a forest fire. So they had to be very careful up on that hill.
It will purify Salem's Lot, and the others will be on it.
This is it. I didn't see the head of that shot. Maybe a flame barb. That was one of the great things about working in a big studio. You can select things that had been used in other films that just may add some kind of magic to your film. And Susan's dress was Jean Harlow's dress. This particular scene, probably the last shots in the film, were the shot off the crane before they come into this little building, and perhaps after. I think maybe they just walk out the door. So I think the very last shot, but this was it, somewhere scheduled at the very end. And it was, I think, a night shoot, obviously on a sound stage.
Yes.
That is his promise.
She doesn't have the teeth in right now. I just made it as beautiful as I could.
Kiss me.
You really don't know what's going to happen. I think you know that it can't be what it appears to be. I would describe the horror in this film as thrilling and emotional. There are a lot of good scenes in it. Scenes that I'm really satisfied with, like David Soul after he gets his head broken and Ed Flanders is talking to him in the hospital. I like the scene at the lake. I like the scene when Ed Flanders and David Soul are driving back from the morgue after the staking of the corpse. I find it one piece. Jeffrey Lewis being mesmerized by the grave. The kids floating through the window. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the film as well as I enjoyed making it.